A judge has just rejected another fresh attempt to stop or change Christa Pike's upcoming execution, but buried inside this latest legal fight is a detail that could be even more important than the ruling itself. The physician connected to Tennessee's botched execution of Tony Carruthers is expected to play a role in Pike's execution, and Pike's attorneys wanted the court to take another look at that physician's qualifications. The judge said no. So where does that leave Christa Pike, and what happens next? Today, we're going through the latest court developments, what the judge actually decided, the concerns raised by Pike's defense team, and why the execution physician has suddenly become one of the central issues in this case. This is the latest update in the Christa Pike case. Christa Pike is 50 years old. She has been on Tennessee's death row for nearly 3 decades, following her 1996 conviction for the 1995 murder of 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer in Knoxville. Tennessee has scheduled Pike's execution for September 30th, 2026. If that execution goes forward, Pike would become the first woman executed by Tennessee in more than 200 years. But before that date arrives, Pike's attorneys are still fighting over one fundamental question. Can Tennessee carry out her execution without causing unconstitutional pain or suffering? That question led to a 3-day evidentiary hearing in August, and it produced a complicated ruling. Pike's attorneys raised several concerns about Tennessee's lethal injection procedure. One of the most important involved Pike's medical condition. Her defense argued that she has thrombocytosis along with difficult venous access, and that these conditions could make establishing an IV line more difficult and potentially cause significant pain during the execution. The state disagreed. Medical testimony presented during the hearing pointed to Pike's previous blood draws as evidence that her veins remained accessible. Judge W. Mark Ward ultimately found that Pike had not demonstrated that the existing procedure would cause the level of physical suffering required to establish a constitutional violation. That decision kept the execution process moving forward. But that wasn't the only argument. Pike's attorneys also presented evidence about her history of severe childhood abuse. Experts testified about her psychological conditions, including PTSD and bipolar disorder, and about the possibility that certain procedures surrounding an execution could trigger traumatic memories. The defense argued that being physically restrained, monitored, and prepared for execution could cause severe psychological distress, but Judge Ward concluded that psychological suffering alone did not meet the legal threshold required to stop the execution. The distinction was crucial. The court was not deciding whether Pike had experienced trauma. It was deciding whether the execution protocol would create constitutionally prohibited suffering. And on that question, the defense did not prevail. This is where the story takes another turn. In May 2026, Tennessee attempted to execute Tony Carruthers. The execution did not go as planned. Medical personnel were unable to establish the required intravenous access, including a central line, and after more than an hour, the execution was called off. Carruthers received a 1-year reprieve from Governor Bill Lee, and one of the physicians involved was Dr. Mark Fowler. Fowler later confirmed that he would be involved in Pike's upcoming execution. That immediately caught the attention of Pike's defense team. According to reporting, Fowler had also said publicly that he had not placed a central line in more than a decade. That matters because Pike's attorneys are specifically challenging whether the state can safely establish the necessary IV access in her case. After the hearing, Pike's attorneys filed an emergency motion asking Judge Ward to reopen the proceedings. Their argument was straightforward. If the physician involved in Pike's execution had also been involved in a failed execution attempt, shouldn't the court examine his qualifications before allowing him to participate again? The defense also raised concerns about whether the physician had hospital privileges to perform the procedure they say may be required. But on August 21st, Judge Ward denied the emergency motion, and his reasoning was significant. Ward indicated that the physician's participation in Pike's execution was not yet guaranteed because Tennessee's selection of execution personnel was not final. In other words, the court was not prepared to treat the physician's involvement as a settled fact, and that meant there was no basis, at that moment, to reopen the hearing. This is important. Judge Ward's decision does not mean every legal avenue has been exhausted. The Tennessee Supreme Court remains involved in the case. Pike's attorneys have until August 28th to raise formal objections to Ward's findings, according to current reporting, and the September 30th execution date remains in place. So, as of now, the timeline looks like this. August 21st, Judge Ward rejects the emergency request to reopen the hearing. August 28th, key filings and objections are due. September 30th, Pike's scheduled execution date. And between those dates, the Tennessee Supreme Court could still have a role in determining what happens next. Christa Pike's case has now lasted nearly 30 years. The original question was simple. Was she guilty of the murder of Colleen Slemmer? That question was answered decades ago when Pike was convicted and sentenced to death, but the legal battle now looks very different. The focus has shifted toward how Tennessee intends to carry out the execution, her medical condition, her psychological history, the IV procedure, the execution protocol, and the qualifications of the people who will carry it out. That's why the physician issue has suddenly become so important, because if the state cannot establish the required IV access, the execution cannot proceed as planned, and Tennessee has already experienced what happens when that procedure fails. For now, there is no new execution date, there is no announced postponement, and there is no final indication that Pike's September 30th execution will be cancelled. The date remains September 30th, but the legal fight is still moving. Pike's attorneys can challenge Ward's findings. The Tennessee Supreme Court remains the higher court overseeing the case, and the state still has to move through the final stages before September 30th arrives. So this story is not finished. Not yet. After almost 3 decades on death row, Christa Pike's case has reached a strange point. The original crime happened in 1995. Her conviction came in 1996. Nearly 30 years of appeals followed, and now, with an execution date approaching, the debate is no longer primarily about what happened in 1995. It is about what happens inside the execution chamber in 2026. The procedure, the medical risk, the psychological consequences, and the people responsible for carrying it out. September 30th is still on the calendar, but between now and then there are still legal decisions to come, and if anything changes, we'll bring you the update. Subscribe to 2 Tiers for documented updates on this case and other major death row cases across the United States.